Good evening. Thank you. Greetings and welcome to Our New Environment Forum here at the beautiful Anne Simley Theater at Hamline University, who is our kind host this evening for our gubernatorial candidate forum. My name is Stephanie Pincala and I am with the Nature Conservancy, which is one of over 24 environmental and conservation groups around the state who've come together to host tonight's event. You can see the sponsoring groups listed up here on the screen as well as on your program if you're here in the audience or on our Eventbrite page where most folks are registered. These groups have a myriad of different priorities all over the spectrum but share a common goal of conserving our environment. Our groups have come together to bring environment and conservation issues to the forefront of this year's gubernatorial election, which is what brings us all here tonight. Candidates for governor from both major parties were invited to participate tonight, and we're grateful for those who have chosen to join us here this evening. I'm sure they would like me to remind you that it's a good time to start thinking about your precinct caucuses on February 6th, and you can look at the Minnesota Secretary of State's website for more information on those. Before we begin, I'd like to set the stage for how tonight's event will work, both here in the theater and for those watching remotely at home or one of 9 satellite viewing parties we have around the metro and greater Minnesota. For those of you who are here watching in Anne Simley Theater tonight, restrooms and overflow seating are located in the atrium. If you do choose to take photographs, we ask that you turn off the flash on your phone or camera. And if you haven't already, please turn your cell phones and other electronics to silent. While you've got your phones out to turn off the sound, we encourage you, if you are on Twitter, to use the hashtag #OneGovForum, which you can see up here on the screen. And then in other technology-related areas, our moderators this evening will be asking questions that are provided by audience members through Pigeonhole, which you can find online at pigeonhole.at, also up on the screen, and enter the code LEGACY, and there you'll be able to rank and select questions. Volunteers will be sorting through those questions, ensuring a variety are asked and posted on the screen for each of the 5 sessions of questions that we'll be going through with our candidates. If your question is not picked, please blame event staff and not our moderators. It's not their fault if a question wasn't selected. Before I introduce our moderators, we'd like to remind everyone that an audience poll will be open from 8 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. on Pigeonhole, where you can go and vote for one of tonight's participating candidates that you feel best reflected your environment and conservation priorities tonight. And lastly, for the folks who are here at Hamline, we invite you to stick around for a reception and cash bar in the atrium following tonight's event. So it's finally time for me to get off the stage. Please join me in welcoming tonight's moderators. First, we have Elizabeth Dunbar, who reports on environment, energy, and climate issues for Minnesota Public Radio News. And second, Dave Orrick, the former outdoors editor of the St. Paul Pioneer Press, who currently covers state government and politics for the Pioneer Press Capitol Bureau. So thanks for being here and welcome our moderators.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm going to go over a few of the procedures here, first of all, tonight. First, we're going to have brief opening remarks from each of the candidates. Then we're going to follow that with Q&A sessions, and there's 5 topic areas, okay? So the first is air and climate. Then we go to land and habitat, water, legacy and environmental funding, and cross-cutting issues. So we're using Pigeonhole, again, as Stephanie mentioned. You should note that the first open-ended question in each of the categories is one that the candidates received ahead of time, and so they may be more prepared for those questions. The rest, we're really excited to see what questions come up. I just love this crowdsourcing, so looking forward to that. Each session, each category will be about 15 to 20 minutes. And we're going to feature several types of questions, okay? So first we've got the standard question, which is a 45 to 60 second answer. That's going to be asked of all candidates. Then we get the yes and no question, and we're going to hold them to that. One-word answer only. And then we have something called the split question. So they'll have 60 seconds to answer that. It's going to be asked of half of the candidates. So we want to get through as many topics as we can. And so there will be a few questions like that where only 3 of the candidates will answer on those. And now we're going to introduce the candidates.
Yeah, let's begin by introducing tonight's candidates. The candidates are welcome to offer opening remarks of no more than 90 seconds. We're going to start by bringing them out one by one, and I would ask that we hold our applause until they've all come out. Former Mayor of St. Paul, Chris Coleman. State Representative Tina Liebling. State Representative Erin Murphy. State Auditor Rebecca Otto. State Representative Paul Teason. And Congressman Tim Walz. Join me now in welcoming them all. Once they're all mic'd up, we'll begin. They are going to do their opening remarks in alphabetical order. That is the order that they are seated. Former Mayor Coleman is used to being in the front of this line, and Congressman Walz is used to being at the end. And I guess while we're taking this moment, similarly, we do have a pretty busy schedule, and we don't have a ton of time to go over all this issues, so we'd ask people to refrain from interruptions of applause and everything. We'll have plenty of time for applause at the end of everything. Mayor Coleman, you ready?
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm so glad that this forum is being hosted in the city of St. Paul, because the city of St. Paul is, I think, an example of what can happen when a community comes together, makes environmental quality a priority, and then acts upon that. For the last 12 years as mayor in the city, I have made environmental quality and sustainability and the fight against climate change a priority for the city of St. Paul. In 2015, I was honored to be in Paris for COP21, and 500 mayors stood on the steps of Paris City Hall, while international leaders were in a tent across the city. Mayors were sitting in City Hall talking not about what they might do to combat climate change, but what the specific steps that they were taking to make sure that their cities were reducing their carbon emissions and helping fight against climate change. Environmental issues have never come from the top down. They've always come from the bottom up. They are citizens sitting in the living room dreaming about how they can recycle more waste and get it out of the waste stream. There are people that come together to City Hall to advocate for transportation systems. There are folks that are standing up and saying, we want our representatives to listen to us and to lead the charge on environmental quality. And that's what we have done in the city of St. Paul. We have something very special here in the state of Minnesota. We have environmental quality that very few states have, and we need to fight like hell to protect it. As your next governor, I want to lead that fight to protect our streams, to protect our rivers, to protect our prairies. And when we make environmental quality a priority, all of us will stand together and create a Minnesota we can be proud of. I want to lead that fight as your next governor. Thank you.
Thank you, former Mayor Coleman. And now Representative Liebling, and we'll remind you that you have 90 seconds.
All right, well, good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. I can't really see you, but it's great to see you. And my name is Tina Liebling. I'm a state representative from Rochester. I'm in my 7th term in the Minnesota House of Representatives. I'm actually the first DFLer ever elected from Olmsted County, and I did that as a bold progressive. I've always been a bold progressive, and I actually belong to many of the organizations that are sponsoring this forum tonight. I've been a member for many, many years, and I have a very strong environmental voting record. But what makes me different from the other candidates here is that I'm the only candidate running for governor who was a supporter of Bernie Sanders. And the reason I supported Bernie Sanders is not because we're both Jewish or I liked his hairstyle. I was supporting Bernie because I believed he was speaking to the real issues. And one of the biggest issues facing us as a nation is the concentration of wealth and power in very few hands, and what this is doing to everybody else. And of course, this plays out in the environmental area, just as it does in so many other areas. So I'm running because we need not only a bold progressive, a person who is progressive, which I am, but also somebody with a backbone, somebody who can't be bullied or intimidated, who will actually stand up to the powers who want to pollute our world and dump greenhouse gases into our climate and all of those kinds of things. So I'm really pleased to be with you tonight, and thank you for caring about our environment.
Thank you, Representative Liebling. Next, we have Representative Erin Murphy.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Erin Murphy. I am a registered nurse and a teacher. I am a mom and a state legislator, and I'm running for governor. I'm running for governor because I believe in a kind of politics that improves people's lives. And when we do that together, we can build a bright future for everybody in the state of Minnesota. I want to do that with you. I am a nurse, and I'm a nurse because I care about people. And I'm in politics for the very same reason. I never thought I was going to run for office, but did after I took care of my mom at the end of her life. And she, like too many people, had good health care coverage, but had to fight to get the care that she needed because the insurance companies were denying that. And it really made me angry, and I decided to run for office. And at her funeral, my aunt said to me, "Go fix health care." And I went to office to go fix health care. But it is really clear to me that if you want to fix the health of the people, if you're committed to the health of the people like I am, then you got to think more about the healthcare system. You have to think about the way that we live and where we live. You have to think about education and transportation and good jobs and a clean environment and a safe climate. It is time for us to lead on these issues together as a state. You have been doing that work, and I want to join you as this state's next governor. I believe that we can build a bright future for the people of Minnesota. I want to do that with you, and I look forward to our conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Murphy. Next, we have State Auditor Rebecca Otto.
My microphone working? Good evening. So this is the theater where my son did his work study. My son graduated from Hamline recently, and I spent a lot of time in here seeing shows, so this is awesome to be here. I texted him a picture, and I said, "Guess where I am?" So anyway, he's mopped this floor many times. So I'm Rebecca Otto, and I am running for governor, and I have had the honor and pleasure of serving as a state auditor now for 3 terms, or almost 12 years. And in this job, you get to oversee local government finances, how the money flows between federal, state, and local government. You work in affordable housing, farm financing, natural resource leases, public pensions, investments. It's an extraordinary job. And you actually have to run statewide to do it. So I've run and won statewide 3 times, and I believe I have the trust of my fellow Minnesotans. A little bit about me. As a little girl, we didn't have much, but we were environmental. So we reduced, reused, and recycled. All my clothes were hand-me-downs. None of them fit. But you know, we were careful with everything, and we did recycle back then, even when it wasn't easy to do. And my grandma taught me the importance of rationing water. She lived in Tucson, Arizona, so there was no lawn. There was a cactus garden. We used our dishwater to water the cactus. So anyway, I really look forward to engaging with all of you. My husband and I, too, designed and built a renewable energy home decades ago because we understood climate change back then. We both drive electric vehicles. This is my life. I'm so happy to be with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Auditor Otto. Next, we have Representative Paul Teason.
Well, thank you all for being here. You know, one of the great parts of this job of running for governor is you get to travel all across the state, and it is an amazing place. You know, from the Driftless region in southeast Minnesota to the Glacial Trail, you know, to the North Shore, right? Incredible resources we have all around the state of Minnesota, and I get to see them all the time, and I'm really blessed at that. You know, I grew up in Bloomington. My folks were both public school teachers. And one of the things that they taught me and showed me through their example was the importance of thinking for the next generation and thinking for the folks down the road. They always sacrificed to make sure my sister and I could get ahead, because that is what people do in Minnesota. And I think that's really relevant, and that value is really relevant to the discussion we're having tonight. Because one of the things I think we've lost in Minnesota on a whole range of issues, but certainly when we're talking about the environment, is that way of thinking long-term and thinking about the next generations. And that's something we need to bring back to our state government. I'm really looking forward to this discussion tonight, in particular because of the seriousness of the issues that we face. There's really 2 existential issues facing us, and I think they're going to intersect here tonight from my perspective. One is climate change and what we're going to do with our environment, and the other is the fact that we're the second most unequal state in the country. And we have these huge racial disparities. And those 2 things fit in very carefully together, and I know we'll have some discussion later on about that. But I think that's the kind of approach that we need to think about as we think about the future of Minnesota, taking on these really tough issues that challenge all of us to come together and really challenge ourselves. One of the things I hope we end up with tonight is the fact that often in the environmental movement, we don't always think about how we're going to listen to the other side. And I think we need to challenge ourselves to do that in a very significant way, and I hope we can talk about that a little bit tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Teason. Last, we'll hear from Congressman Tim Walz.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Tim Walz. I'm a public school geography teacher from Mankato, where my wife is an educator, and my daughter Hope is a junior at Mankato West, and my son Gus is a 5th grader at Roosevelt Elementary School. For the last 12 years, I've had the privilege of representing the 1st District in the United States Congress. And the thank you to all of you being here. I came back from that debacle last night from D.C., and this is the antidote to that. This is the billions of people around the world can't imagine gathering together to talk about how we shape our future. And this issue of environmental justice, of how we move forward on sustainability, is central to every issue that we have. And in the United States Congress, I've been center at the fights that are the most important and where most of the things are done on conservation, which is in the Farm Bill. And it's no mistake up here. You have wonderful leaders up here and wonderful environmentalists, but there's people missing here. The people that we will have to talk to in November, the people that are out there that we make the case to. And what I've been able to do, I think, in the Farm Bill is making this case that there is no separation from this. We don't have to choose winners and losers in this. What we need to do is make sure we're putting safeties in place to make sure those environmental safeguards and those levels are met, but by bringing in the folks who are most impacted by that, by building the coalitions to make it happen. And in the last Farm Bill, we were able to get one of the most environmentally sound farm bills, and we do that by bringing in the stakeholders who make a difference. So as your governor of Minnesota, we know this is the choir. The choir needs to sing loudly, but these truths that we're trying to get to, we need to go and make the case to our neighbors. And as your governor, I think I've proven it as a member of Congress, and we can do it here to move Minnesota to that sustainable future. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Congressman Walz. It's a good time maybe to remind everyone to make sure their cell phones are silenced. And Elizabeth will be taking the first question now.
Right, we're going to head into the air and climate category. So first is a yes or no only. Do you believe that global climate change is a serious environmental challenge that requires immediate action to address? Starting with Mayor Coleman.
Yes.
Of course.
That's 2 words.
That's 2 words, that's right.
Yes.
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 Okay, see, that wasn't so hard. We'll go to the second question now. We're supposed to see it up here. All right, here it is, crowdsourced. No, this is the one that you guys got ahead of time. This is the first open-ended question that all the candidates got ahead of time. In 2007, Minnesota put a greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal in place. That included a 30% reduction by 2025 and 80% reduction by 2050. What would you do as governor to meet this emissions goal? We're going to start with Representative Liebling.
So I think the answer is make it a priority. And the way I would do that, first of all, I just heard actually on public radio on the way up here this evening that St. Paul just, the new mayor just appointed somebody, I think they called him a resiliency director or something like that. I think that's a great idea. Somebody who's cabinet level, whose purpose there is to make sure that we're focusing on these issues. And that the other thing is we've got to bring people together to figure out how to move forward. That's very important. But what we should never do is invite the corporate interests to the table and allow them to make the decision. We need to first talk about how we're going to move forward, what we need to be doing, and fight for the things that we believe in. And then if we have to compromise after we've fought for what we really need to do, then we compromise. But we should never compromise first before we put our program forward, especially with something as important as our climate.
Okay, Representative Murphy, 60 seconds.
So I think in the work that we've been doing in Minnesota since I've been elected back in 2006, why we're making such great progress is because our values around a clean air and a clean energy is because it's aligning very closely with our economic interests. And that's good news for us, and that means we can continue to make progress. When I ran in 2006, I ran in a crowded field of strong Democrats, including Don Arnosti, who is a leader on a lot of these issues. And I will tell you, I learned a lot from him as a candidate. And when I was elected at a time when Governor Tim Pawlenty still believed that climate change was something serious that we should take on. And so we did pass the Renewable Energy Standard. I think we need to extend that. We should take take advantage of the work that we're doing here, individuals, Minnesotans, communities, and the market are doing to extend that and push ourselves. But I'd also like us to do some work to tackle the transportation sector. I think it's time for us to invest in the electric vehicle infrastructure that's necessary to make electric vehicle use easier for people across the state of Minnesota. And when I'm the state's governor, I'm going to make sure that we are also investing in electric vehicle fleets across the state.
Okay, Auditor Otto.
I'm the only candidate that actually has a plan, and it's called the Minnesota Powered Plan. It was written about in The Guardian. We got an article in Scientific American. We should be leading the nation in the clean energy economy, and I'm being on the cutting edge of the clean energy economy. And I have a plan that will exceed the goals of this 81% by 2045, a reduction of 81%. So we're missing out on an opportunity as a state, and we're getting a little bit behind. We used to be ahead, we're getting a little behind. So we should be going after this with gusto. And my plan can create up to 250,000 good-paying jobs. This is the next generation of jobs. As other jobs are getting mechanized and automated in mining and other areas, we need to make sure we have our eye on the prize and our eye on making sure that we have attracted that next generation, 21st century jobs. We have facilities that can train in these jobs, and it's basically fee and dividends. So if you follow the Citizens Climate Lobby, it's that with a twist.
Like a twist 11.
All right, Representative Teason.
Well, thanks. Well, I mean, I think the plan is pretty well set out how we can get there. You know, the CSEO recommendations that the state agencies have come up with is a pretty comprehensive pathway to getting there. It is talking about, you know, setting a new renewable energy standard that I was very proud to be a part of in 2007 and proud to be leading the Speaker of the House when we passed the solar energy standard in 2013. But if we increase that energy standard, that renewable energy standard to 50%, that gets us a quarter of the way there just doing that. We do need to focus in on transportation, and not just moving toward electric vehicles, but that's important, but how we design our communities so we don't have to use carbon-based vehicles as much as we have to. So denser urban planning is a real step that we can take in that direction. The thing I'd also like to do is make a real investment in research and development and set a standard for moving toward battery storage. We should figure that out, because if we can solve that, the whole equation changes very rapidly. And so we should make a moon mission, I think, around making battery storage something that Minnesota is going to figure out and solve. And if we do that, I think we get to these goals very easily.
Congressman Walz.
Yeah. I agree with Paul. The plan is right, and I think moving to 50% by 2030 makes sense. We know what the issue is. We know it's an existential threat. We know we need to go about it. In the United States Congress, I voted for cap and trade legislation. I voted for and secured $100 million for the Renewable Energy for America program. But what's interesting about that is I did that in the second most Republican district in America. It's not about having the best plan. It's having the best message to make the plan work for people who matter. I'm a teacher. It's Maslow's hierarchy. It's not self-actualization to say that this is real. My folks want to turn on the light switch. They want them to come on, and they want their bills to be payable. We can make that case. Take them out there. Why these investments in energy security create jobs, grow the economy, and make sense to them. And we need to do that by bringing in the rural electric cooperatives, by bringing in those municipal utilities who have to deliver the power and see them as partners in this. They want to get there too. They care that it's there. And I think it's that messaging of moving those folks to try and make it, deliver it, by being partners in moving Minnesota to a secure future, one that is better for those working families and is sustainable. So as governor, that's the number one issue. We know the problem. We have the solutions. It's now getting the social permit to implement them.
And Mayor Coleman.
Thank you. Well, they're ambitious goals, but I don't think they're ambitious enough. In the city of St. Paul, our goal is to get to carbon neutrality by 2050. And I think if we do that, if we have that goal, we have to make sure that we're working that plan all the way through. And right now, we're not on track to make our 20% or our 80% reduction by 2050, nor are we on track to make our 30% reduction by 2025. And so we need to make sure that the emissions inventory that we've done actually is put into an action plan, and we reduce emissions not just on the state level, but in every city. There are 800 cities across the state of Minnesota. There are 87 counties. And every one of those governmental units has to do an emissions reduction plan and then have the resources and the tools and to be able to actually work that plan. When Minnesota passed its new building code, it was the same year that Denmark passed their building code. The difference is that Denmark's standard is 50% less energy use than the state of Minnesota's. We need to be aggressive on this one. We need to be the international leader, and I think that Minnesota has historically been that, and I want to be that again.
All right, we're going to move along to our first crowdsourced question here in the air and climate category. Canadian company Enbridge Energy is proposing a new Line 3 oil pipeline across Minnesota to carry 760,000 barrels per day of Canadian tar sands oil. Do you support this project? Why or why not? And we're going to start with Representative Liebling. No, Representative Murphy, sorry, and we'll have 45 seconds.
I have already voted against this pipeline, and I have grave concern about it, primarily because of where it's sited. But I'm also very interested in the Department of Commerce's report that suggests that the capacity is not necessary. I think it is time for us to move as quickly and as swiftly as we can toward renewable sources. And if we continue to pipe in tar sands oil, it is going to delay the work that we need to do. We're going to continue to rely on some fossil fuels here in the state of Minnesota, and I am not anti-pipeline by itself, but I do not think that the Line 3 pipeline makes sense. I don't think it makes sense about where they're siting it through tribal land, and I don't know that we need the capacity here in the state of Minnesota, and that's why I don't support it.
Next, Auditor Otto.
Oh, yep. No. And because I've got the next generation of good paying jobs, it's in the clean energy economy. I drive an electric vehicle, my husband drives an electric vehicle. He's had his for years. He was a very early implementer. Mine has a gas extender because I couldn't afford that all electric, but it's coming. And all the car companies, basically, there's another major car company that just announced they're going to all electric. The train has left the station, the cow has left the barn. You can use whatever analogy you want. The world is changing. And there's extraordinary opportunity with the world changing. My husband and I plug in at night. We use off-peak electric. It's much less expensive. Now, if you don't drive a car, we also have electric buses in Minnesota already. We've got to get to that so everybody gets to take advantage because not everyone's going to drive. But these tar sands are the most carbon-emitting fossil fuel out there, and they should not be transported. There's no need for them.
All right, Representative Teason.
Thanks. It would be great if everybody could afford to drive an electric vehicle like Rebecca and her husband do, but we're not at that point. And we need to make a transition to that kind of economy. We need to move aggressively, but we need to understand that there is going to be a transition. So I do not oppose pipelines per se. I oppose this route and have taken that position, partly because I have concerns about the delicate environment that it's going through. More importantly to me, I have very serious concerns about the fact that the tribes have not been engaged and their sovereignty has not been respected. Until Enbridge and the tribes sit down and actually try to work out an agreement on this, if they can, I think this project can't get started. But I don't oppose pipelines as a matter of kind of principle because we do need to make a transition to this economy, and transition is the critical word.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving on. I'm seeing people want to butt in there. Let's get through everybody, and then maybe we can do a follow-up on this. So, Congressman Walz, 45 seconds.
Well, I agree with Paul. I mean, I think it's self-evident. All of us know, we know where the science is. We need to transition sooner rather than later to off a fossil fuel economy. We've got 2.4 million pipelines in this country. Most are hazardous because you can't move them by train because it's dangerous. The issue of replacement of pipelines that are leaking, it makes environmental sense to do it. As far as Line 3 is, I was immediately, the impact on the indigenous community is unacceptable. That is a non-starter. It's a way of doing this, of going out, and I've asked the Enbridge people, they need to think about being the partners in this. If you're going to replace a pipeline, you're going to get it done. And I voted for pipelines when the EIS has supported them. I voted against them if they haven't, if the science supports this. The current route does not include the treaty rights and respecting of that, so I think we come back to this. But again, I would say this too. I'm not opposed in principle to the pipelines, but we need to see about that transition.
Mayor Coleman, your turn.
Well, there certainly are reasons to be concerned about this pipeline, but I think there's a lot more reasons to be concerned about the existing situation that we have. We have a 50-year-old leaky pipeline that's leaking oil into our watershed and into our aquifer, and we need to do something about that. This, as somebody else mentioned, this isn't a question of whether or not this oil is going to be moved, it's how it's going to be moved. While we transition into a carbon neutral economy, I think we all know that we need to accelerate our change to a carbon neutral economy, but that is going to be still a transitional strategy. So the question is, for the next 20 to 30 years, how is this oil going to be moved? I don't want it being moved through a leaky pipeline that exists right now. We need to address the issues of tribal sovereignty. We need to make sure we're protecting the headwaters of the Mississippi River. But science and good engineering, I think, can help us on this one.
Representative Liebling.
So I do not think that we should allow this pipeline to be built for a number of reasons that have been mentioned here. Of course, oil is not the fuel of the future, and some of my colleagues up here have talked a little bit about that. I think that if we allow this enormous investment in this new pipeline, even not talking about the route, which is a problem, but it just delays the inevitable. So instead of making huge investments that get passed on to ratepayers in outdated technology, I believe that climate change is an emergency. And if it's an emergency, we should not be building new infrastructure to continue with the greenhouse gas emissions that we're dealing with now.
So pipelines are a big issue out there. I'm going to let everybody go through, and there were some differences in your opinions on what we should do, how Minnesota should approach this Line 3 replacement / expansion project. So if there's something that you wanted that you heard that you wanted to respond to, I'm going to start with Representative Murphy. We're just going to go in the same order. You can pass if you want, but if you wanted to add something, and let's keep it really short, like 20 seconds.
20 seconds of rebuttal. This is the questions that we face going forward as the state of Minnesota tugs at shared values. And we've heard mention of moving toward a renewable energy economy. We need to do that, absolutely. We need to make that transition. We have to think about the jobs and our way of life across the state of Minnesota. Nothing about that is easy. But I have a lot of faith, especially in the years that I have worked and served in the Minnesota Legislature, in our capacity to actually tackle tough issues just like this one if we keep our eyes on our future.
Demand for finished petroleum is down 19% since 2004, and rail transport of oil has dropped 70% of what it was in 2014. The world is changing, and Paul, I just want to assure you that my Minnesota Powered Plan, there's clean energy tax credits because we're going to place a price on carbon, and you, when you replace your car, will be able to get 30% off a new or used electric vehicle. Everybody will. We're empowering Minnesotans to take charge of their energy future, and so everybody gets to partake, not just my husband and I.
Well,
Working folks.
yeah, I appreciate that, and I guess the point though is you actually have to get something passed. Nothing matters if you don't actually get something done. We have a plan that the CSEO has laid out. The odds of Rebecca Otto passing her plan in the next 4 years, particularly if the Republicans are in control of one piece of the legislature, are pretty low. So we need to be serious about actually facing up to the challenges that we face in a meaningful way, and that's one of the things I think that I can offer as the next governor.
Congressman Walz, do you want to add anything to this discussion
No,
about
I think I'm
pipelines?
good.
Okay, good. All right.
I'm going to stay out of this.
Well, again, I look, it's not just Paul. I agree with you that it's about what you can pass in the legislature, but first and foremost, it's about how we can elect a Democratic governor that is going to look at these projects with an environmental lens. We saw what happened when we had a guy that said he was going to make coal great again, and the response was, we're going to retrain you for different jobs. We got to figure out how we transition our economies. We got to transition how we respond to these issues, or we're going to have a Republican who doesn't give a damn about the environment as the next governor.
Representative Liebling.
So it's great to have plans, but when you get elected, your plans meet reality. So having a bunch of detail in a plan really is about worth the paper that it's written on, except that it tells you which way you want to go, which is fine. When we talk about getting something done, we have to fight for what we know is the right thing. And as I said before, sometimes you have to compromise, but we shouldn't compromise first. Climate change is an emergency. We have to keep that in mind.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next pigeonhole question, and this is going to be a split question, which means only 3 of the candidates up here are going to answer it. And we have it up. We are waiting for the question. There it is. All right. State law prohibits construction of new nuclear plants. With high costs and lack of safe, reliable disposal for the volatile nuclear waste created, would you veto attempts to lift the moratorium? And this question is going to Auditor Otto, Congressman Walz, and Representative Teason, starting with Auditor Otto.
I don't know the answer. I'm looking at it. high cost, lack of safe, reliable disposal. Yeah, those are current issues. To lift the moratorium, and I believe that our plants right now are licensed through 2025 or maybe more. I'm not positive. And so this would be a moratorium on new construction.
Correct.
Probably. I mean, we've got plants in place right now, so yeah. Sorry.
Was that clear to everybody, or do you need? No. Okay. So Auditor Otto.
Yes.
We're just going to clarify.
I'll
this,
just say
okay?
yes.
So I agree. The question is worded a little funky. So let's put it this way. Do you support lifting the ban on new nuclear plants in Minnesota?
No, I'd veto attempts to lift the moratorium that's currently in place.
Is that clear, everybody? Thank you. All right.
You're welcome.
All right. Congressman Walz, you're second on this one.
Yeah, and this is one as governor of where the people are at. This is a great question in that it gets at that transition phase. I think many of us from Fukushima and other issues with nuclear power of how do we move to, because I do think that existential threat of how do we get baseload power. One of the issues that we can't even look at it or think about it with the moratorium, and it also causes a problem with storage. Those above ground storage casts at Prairie Island are a problem. This goes back to the federal issue of Yucca Mountain. So this would be one of the public's intent on this. I do think, and I would ask all of you, if this threat is real, it may be a choice of the lesser of evils on how we're dealing with some of these in that baseload power piece. Nuclear power certainly has its drawbacks, everything from the concrete involved, but I would follow the will of the people on this as it came forward. But I would ask all of you, we need to talk about all of these pathways because it's that big of a threat.
Okay, and finally, Representative Teason.
Thanks. Well, I've always... So, I've always opposed and voted against the lifting of the moratorium. We have, and frankly, if you... and voted that way, and frankly, if you talk to Xcel Energy, they will tell you the same thing. They don't have any economic interest in actually building a new nuclear power plant because it is so expensive. You know, is there new technology coming up in other countries and other places that may change that calculus someday in the future? Perhaps, but we are not there yet. So I oppose lifting the moratorium and would veto that bill if it were to come to my desk.
Here because, oh, there we go. We got it back. I just wanted to make sure we didn't say too much because our video audience is going to be unable to hear any of this.
So I would veto that bill.
You would veto that bill.
Okay,
Great. Okay. All right. We are moving on. I think we've got one more of these split questions where we have three candidates answer it. So here we go. This is also a yes/no. Is that right? Are we going to do this to everybody? Okay, everybody gets to vote. Everybody gets to answer this one because it's a one-word answer. Okay, so yes or no question. Would you support divestment of Minnesota state pension holdings from fossil fuels? And we're starting with Representative Teason this time.
Yes, I'm the chief author of that bill.
Congressman Walz.
It's a tough yes or no. Pension protection is my...
Yes or no?
It's not a yes or no question.
No.
It really isn't. That's
no, not, it's more complex, but if you want to know, no,
Okay.
because of the pension.
Got it. Mayor Coleman.
That's really an unfair question. Yes or no? I support socially responsible investing, but we also have duties to our state employees for
That
their
sounds like
pension.
a no. Okay, Representative Liebling.
It's a maybe.
Yes.
Representative Murphy.
First and foremost, I'm going to protect those pension funds because that's my responsibility, and then yes.
That sounds like, okay. Auditor Otto.
I'm a trustee on this board right now, and if we had to do this tomorrow, I'd have to say no. It's going to happen over time.
Okay. All right. We are moving on to our next category.
I'll be handling the questions on this one. This is the land and habitat section. And the first question, is one of the questions The open-ended question, candidates have all received this question in advance. They'll have 60 seconds to answer. The order of answering will be, well, I'll ask the question first. What should be the state's role in acquiring land in order to protect habitat as well as hunting, fishing, and recreational opportunities? This will begin with Congressman Walz.
Yeah,
60 seconds.
This is a central role, and this is something we need to do more of. We don't have federal land south of the Twin Cities, and those are the agricultural and the fragile lands. I'm a lifetime member of Pheasants Forever, and the answer to this question is partnerships. The role of the state is to be partners with the organizations to acquire these lands, to make sure that in the federal government, the Farm Bill, whether it's CRP or more importantly CSP dollars, to take those most fragile lands out and turn them back. But when you do the partnerships with the people most engaged, whether it's hiking, whether it's fishing, whether it's pheasant hunting, those are the types of people that brings those investments in. We need to make sure we're funding programs that see us as partners in that. One of the successful ones we had was having EQIP dollars federally with some state dollars on a permanent easement on a spring feedlot with a gentleman who called himself a Republican and wasn't sure about how that would work out. He's got a better feedlot running more cattle, and we have a pristine trout stream down there near Rushford that also created 3 outfitters and 2 bed and breakfast. The state's role needs to be central as the partner of bringing people together to purchase those most fragile lands, but to make sure they're in the hands for usage of the public.
Thank you. Representative Liebling is next.
So I think that this is one where, yes, I think that the state should have a role in acquiring land, but sometimes you get pushback from local governments because they are losing their tax base. And I think that the state also has a role in making sure that we maintain these payments we call PILT, payment in lieu of taxes, so that they're kept whole. And I do think that we have to work with local governments about what lands are going to be protected and so on. So it's not a simple answer, but I think that acquiring land and making sure that the land is protected. I've been a member of the Nature Conservancy for a long time, have given a lot of money to help them buy land, to protect that land, and I think it's very, very important that we do that.
Thank you. Auditor Otto.
I would support continuing to, the state to continue to acquire lands as recommended by Lessard's Outdoor Council. And the one thing I know from Minnesotans as I traveled the state starting in January when I held a listening tour is over and over and over, Minnesotans said that they love their parks and trails, they love their lakes, their streams, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area. There's all these really special places. And that we need to protect, special areas, the scientific and natural areas. So we cannot back down on that because that's actually what makes us special as a state. And if we forget that, the nature of our state will change. So.
Thank you. Representative Teason is next.
I do support using our public dollars to buy land. I also think it's important that we strike the right balance and have enough resources left to properly manage those lands. And I don't know that we've struck that balance quite appropriately yet. One of the things we've done in terms of limiting our ability to acquire these lands is we've put artificial restraints and kind of the dysfunction at the Capitol, quite frankly, in not being able to get big bonding bills out. And we need to make those bonding bills larger, and we need to make sure that the priorities in those bonding bills are spread across everything, including acquisition of land that's important. You know, we've spent way too much money in the last several bonding bills in transportation because we've been unable to pass a transportation bill. So we need to actually reprioritize how we do the bonding. We also need to be much more strategic, I think, about the lands that we're acquiring. The Nature Conservancy has a great plan to protect the Mississippi headwaters. We are building corridors, up and down western Minnesota to connect habitat. A wellhead acquisition. If we use our resources to be much more strategic, I think we're going to get more support for this.
Thank you. And Representative Murphy.
I also support the state's role in purchasing and acquiring land, but I think we want to think through why we're doing it. Certainly there are lots of interest Minnesotans using that land for outdoor recreation and the things that make Minnesotans Minnesota. But I also want to think about the health of the land. When I think about the ecosystem of Minnesota, it is important that we're investing in the land that we're acquiring to make sure that we are protecting the ecosystem, the prairie, the natural prairie, the forest, the wetlands, which from my perspective are like the kidneys of the state of Minnesota. And we have to make sure those things are functioning to keep our soil and our land and our air and our water clean And we've got to keep our eye on that function as we continue to do land acquisition across the state.
Thank you, and Mayor Coleman.
Well, Dave, certainly you know as well as anybody as a former outdoor reporter for the Pioneer Press that we are losing an important part of our heritage because our pheasant counts and our protected hunting lands and natural areas have really been reduced over the years, and we need to restore that. Prior to the Legacy Amendment, we had $20 million on a biennium, at least $20 million going into acquisition of public lands such as these and other programs. And the Legacy Amendment was never meant to supplement or to replace that. It was supposed to supplement it. And so we're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul. So we need to invest more in the preservation of public lands. But this isn't just an urban versus rural issue. The Trust for Public Lands was an incredibly important partner in the Frogtown Gardens in the city of St. Paul, in a neighborhood that had very little green space, which is critically important, I think, in the overall health of our communities. And so whether you're in greater Minnesota or you're in central cities, these partnerships with the Nature Conservancy, Trust for Public Land, and others, Pheasants Forever, become incredibly important.
Thank you. I want to stick with this issue for just a second and throw out a yes or no question to everybody. I believe we already heard the answer from Representative Teason, but just to put a point on this, and we're going to start with Congressman Walz. As governor, would you support bonding to buy public lands to protect habitat and hunting, fishing, and recreational opportunities? Yes or no, please?
Yes.
Representative Liebling.
Yes.
Auditor Otto?
Yes.
Representative Teason, just for clarification?
Yes.
Representative Murphy?
Yep.
And Mayor Coleman.
Me too.
Thank you. On to our next question. This one comes from the crowd at Pigeonhole. Do you think that the current draft permits for Polymet, including the DNR's permit to mine, adequately protect Minnesota waters, downstream communities, and taxpayers? Do you support this project as proposed? You will have 45 seconds to answer this question, and we will start with Representative Liebling.
I absolutely oppose that project. I do not think that we should be doing copper nickel sulfide mining in Minnesota. Sometimes people say, oh, wait for the science. I have not seen anything that would tell me that we're going to see science that says that we can do this safely in the water-rich environment that we have in this state. And no matter what kind of financial guarantees the company may put forward, it's not going to be enough for future generations. This is just something that is going to harm our environment, and they should not have free use of our water. It really comes down to that. So this is something, we've got to find other ways to put people to work, not this way.
Thank you. Auditor Otto.
Something I focused on for a while as state auditor, being on the executive council. Polymet is not offering enough in financial assurances, and that's not providing it all up front. It's been estimated they need about $1 billion to really protect Minnesotans' interests. Right now the laws allow for this type of mining, but where the magic is in the financial assurances, and these companies never put up enough, and the taxpayers always end up holding the bag, and there's usually contamination. So they're putting up $75 million in the first 2 years for site cleanup, and then up to $544 million when the mine opens. That's up to $400 million short. We don't have the money. We don't want to inherit that. It's not acceptable, and we should never be saddled with these liabilities. And it's in a water-sensitive area. So, and the industry just said they're moving to more automation, more robots. So it's really not about the jobs, and we need to be very clear about what this means to our future.
Thank you. Next is Representative Teason.
Well, I've not read the whole permit, although I started through it. I agree, first of all, with Rebecca, with Auditor Otto on the financial assurance. I think that is the biggest weakness in the permit right now. I also have to question, though, some of the discussion I've heard around this issue, where we say that the science doesn't support it, and yet we have very expert scientists who are our state employees who are doing this analysis and who have come out with this permit. And I don't know where we start to draw the line when we don't want to believe those scientists and we say we're not going to believe them, and when we want to believe them, we do. So we need to challenge this, and I am very much in support of keeping this process as open as possible. But I also think we do have to follow the science, and when that permit is issued, we have to enforce it much better than we've ever enforced permits in the past.
Thank you. Representative Murphy.
When we talk about copper nickel mining and Polymet, it is important to remember that we're talking about our water, our jobs, our people, and our future. And from my perspective, when we're pitting jobs against something as important as water, one of those things are going to fall behind, and that's not good enough from my perspective. I think it's very likely that PolyMet could get their permit before the next election, and we have to make sure that they are we are encumbering them with strong financial assurances. But they are proposing holding water that's been used to treat in the process of mining for 500 years, and from my perspective, that is not a strong enough solution, though they may get their permit based on that. I think it's time for us to invest more in the Natural Resources and Research Institute. We have water that's impaired across the state because of agriculture, because of mining, because of salting our highways, and because of development. We need to protect our water, and that is my job as the governor for the state of Minnesota when I'm elected. Protecting our water is our top priority, but we cannot say to a company that has followed the law and followed the science that they cannot be allowed to mine if they've secured that permit.
Thank you, Representative Murphy. We will get nasty over here if you guys run over time too much. The next person to answer this question is Mayor Coleman.
This is a hard question to answer in 45 seconds because as a person who is passionate about Lake Superior and the streams and lakes of northern Minnesota, I'm very concerned about the environmental quality, but I'm also concerned about climate change. And the fact of the matter is, in order for us to get to a carbon neutral economy, we have to have copper, we have to have nickel, we have to have those minerals that we get in northern Minnesota. 5 tons of copper in every windmill, 200 pounds of copper in every hybrid vehicle. So we're going to get these from someplace, and they don't naturally occur in a farm in Dakota County. So we have to have the highest and most rigorous environmental standards. This process has gone through the Obama EPA, not the Trump EPA. This has gone through our process. I think we're very close. There are some final assurances that need to be put in place, but then I think we need to go forward with PolyMet.
Thank you. And Congressman Walz.
Yeah, we all know this is the issue in here, and I know for many of you this is a litmus test question. And the first thing I did when I said I was running for governor was I went north and walked every piece of this land. I have enough credits, I think, over at Duluth auditing their mining to get a degree over there because that's the responsibility. I too agree that the boundary waters and our waters are sacred. They're sacred to me and they're sacred to you. And I agree with Mayor Coleman's exactly right on this. The copper is the part of the new energy economy. It has to be done. It's going to be done somewhere. And the issue is can Minnesota put things in place? If the science does not support it, if the permits and the EIS do not support it, we shouldn't do it. But if there's a way to prove that we can do this with those financial assurances and protect it, I think we have a responsibility to do it here because it's going to be a mineral that's needed to transition us. So again, on the permits, haven't read it all. As Paul said, at this point in time, we still have our concerns on how it comes out. Follow the science.
Thank you, candidates. I think we saw some differing perspectives on a really important issue right there. Now we're going to go to the split question. This question will be asked of Auditor Otto, Representative Teason, and Representative Murphy. You will have 60 seconds to answer this question. Outdoor recreation contributes $4.3 billion to our economy. Access to public lands is critical to support this economic force. How will you promote access to recreational opportunities on state lands? We begin with Auditor Otto. You have 60 seconds.
I will do whatever I can to make sure that people have access to state lands and would love to have a conversation around issues if we're having them. See, this is one that we didn't get to see ahead of time, so I have to think it through. Critical, yeah. We love our state because we get to play in our state. People come to our state to play in our state. So it's really, again, that's what makes us special as a state, and I will do all that I can. In fact, as governor, I'd like to do some really different things. There's always the hunting opener and all of that, but I also want to do some other things, kind of highlighting some of our state parks and Boundary Waters Canoe Area and lots of different areas to make sure Minnesotans know all the beautiful places that we have. But if there are issues with access, I would be more than happy to work on them because it is an important part of our economy.
Thank you. Representative Teason, this question is to you now.
So is there a possibility of trading? Because Congressman Walz really wants this question.
Congressman Walz, like all of you, can address the crowd afterwards in the reception.
Okay. I think that there's two things that we ought to think about. One is when we are thinking about the acquisition of lands with our own dollars, making sure that we're strategic about it and doing it in ways. First of all, the law already requires those types of land to be open to the public, but doing it in a way where we're creating access to other public lands that may not be as accessible. And I think that's one important piece. The second thing is when we see some of these big transitions of public land to private entities, like happened with, Blandon properties up north, we need to make sure that we are putting requirements in place that there continues to be open access to those lands. And the state certainly has a role in making sure that that happens.
Thank you. And finally, Representative Murphy.
When I think about our way of life, of course we want to make sure that people have access to public lands. I love to fish. My husband loves to hunt. I have been all over the state of Minnesota in participating in recreation like many of you have. And it is an economic driver for the state of Minnesota, but it is also central to who we are and how we live. I was in Crosby last week and spent some time talking with the people in that community about what has happened because of the advent of the bike trails on the Cuyuna Range. It has changed and transformed that community. Access to recreation is critical to economic development. It's critical to our health. And when I think about people that live across the state of Minnesota, especially our diverse population and people coming from other parts of the world, access to our state parks and to public land is going to help enrich their participation and enrich us as a people together. And it's really critical culturally and economically, and that's why I support it.
Thank you. I just want to make sure, for the members of the audience, was there audio working there? Yeah, we're having some audio issues, I know. I'm sure they're working on it backstage.
Erin, if you put your microphone more in the middle, because when you put your head this way, that's where it goes out.
Yeah.
Why don't we do a quick sound check on Representative Murphy?
Erin.
Auditor Otto, Auditor Otto, Auditor Otto.
Erin, go like right here, right here. Okay.
Thank you. Now we have the other split question. This question will go to Mayor Coleman, Congressman Walz, and Representative Liebling. You will have 60 seconds to answer this. This is from the crowd. You have not seen this question in advance. Trees in our communities are at risk due to an invasive species, emerald ash borer. What will you do as governor to assist communities, taxpayers, in the battle against the emerald ash borer? We'll start with Mayor Coleman.
Well, thank you. I remember a few years ago, somebody came in, one of my staff members came into the office and said, they found emerald ash borer in St. Anthony Park. And I thought it was one of those child kidnapping cases. And I was like, who's emerald ash borer? I haven't heard of her before. Because we hadn't heard of this disease. And all of a sudden it became this problem that was wiping out trees across the city of St. Paul. But it was originally viewed as a city of St. Paul problem. But the fact of the matter is this is a statewide problem. There are millions and millions of trees that are at risk that ultimately will be gone. There's no way to stop this. We can only slow it down. But ever since that we discovered emerald ash borer in the city of St. Paul, I have gone up to the state legislature. I have asked for resources, as there were resources when we fought the Dutch elm disease many years ago. There were millions of dollars from the state legislature given to local communities to support the removal of diseased trees. And now, because of the Republicans that want to make everything a political football, the Twin Cities versus the rest of Minnesota, we haven't had those resources. I'll fight like hell to make sure that cities across the state of Minnesota have the resources they need to treat this disease and replant, which is a critically important part of that process.
Thank you. Next, Congressman Walz, 60 seconds.
Yeah, the issue of invasive species is something we work on, obviously, in the agricultural department, whether it be invasive carp and the things. These are detrimental not just to our environmental, not just to our environments, they're detrimental to our economies in many cases. And in the case of the emerald ash borer, Mayor Coleman is right about this. It needs to funnel through the agricultural department, and what's really at stake here and what really needs to be focused on is it's the education piece of this, making sure the resources are out there to educate, making sure the quicker you find these things that you can stop that infestation. There's things that we can put in, and many of you are familiar with this. Don't buy camp wood, firewood, and carry it somewhere else. Those are problems that we have. It's the cleaning the boat thing. It's these public service types of announcements of getting in there that, again, I think the mayor's right about this. They somehow think it's some type of socialist conspiracy to tell people to do the right thing, to not do this. We need to make sure that we're talking about that, pushing those things forward, and again, funneling it through a very focused education piece and make it's almost, as we all remember this, that those campaigns, give a hoot, don't pollute type of things, this emerald ash borer is a big deal, and eventually it has a major economic impact as well as the diminishment of our environment. So we do need the resources, but it's the education piece and the focus on it.
Thank you. Representative Liebling.
So years ago, when we had the Dutch elm disease problem, I was living in Minneapolis and was a volunteer spotter and, got involved in trying to save that urban canopy. And a lot of the trees have been replaced, but it could never be completely replaced. I mean, it just changes the way you feel about where you live when you have beautiful trees. And so I agree with Mayor Coleman about what's happened to this issue, that we've tried in the legislature to put money toward helping municipalities deal with this, because they shouldn't be left alone. This is an agriculture issue, and agriculture does not have to be divided into rural versus metro, and it's been made into that, unfortunately, by the Republicans in the legislature. So we need to stand up to this, because having trees, it's about our how we feel about where we live. It cleans our air. It's about carbon. Very important that we put state dollars into helping municipalities deal with emerald ash borer, whether it's stopping the disease or also removing the dangerous trees after they're dying.
Thank you, candidates. We're going to move on to the next session.
Water. Okay, so this first open-ended question is one that the candidates were sent ahead of time. So, cropland runoff, major source of pollution to Minnesota's waters. And we're not making progress. What will you do to accelerate the incorporation of water-friendly perennial crops and cover crops? And this one is a 60-second answer, starting with Representative Murphy.
I'm a nurse and I love science and think that innovation is going to be one of the key drivers for us and for our future. And I was really, really happy to support David Bly, Representative Bly, when he moved forward with legislation when I was the majority leader on Forever Green. I love spending time with Don Weiss over at the University of Minnesota and learning about the cover crops that will go to market. And this is the trick for us, right? We can figure out how to plant cover crops. We can figure out how to protect the soil, and we need to, because the current farming practices, I think, are eroding the soil. But what they're doing at the University of Minnesota is developing cover crops, winter crops, perennial crops that will go to market. So we will give farmers in the state of Minnesota other options besides what we're focusing on right now, corn and beans. And if we're able to find a marketable cover crop, a perennial, it is a win-win for us. And when I think about the work in front of us and why I'm so enthusiastic about what we're going to be able to do it together is because the solutions that seem sometimes elusive are right around the corner.
All right. Next is Auditor Otto on this question.
Yes.
60
So
seconds.
I grow a perennial cover crop at my small farm. We grow hay, and it holds the soil very well. We already know this. I would support new incentives to encourage the use of perennial crops and cover crops in farming, because we know that with runoff and you get erosion and more chemicals. So cover crops are extremely important. I met with a corn farmer recently. We talked about this, and he said to me, because the U does research on this, I will support the U to continue to do this research. So we're doing best practices. And they said to me, oh, well, they're doing it in Iowa, but I think they've got some problems with pathogens in the soil. And I'm going to follow up with one of the scientists on that, because I'm not familiar with that issue. But he seemed open to the idea of doing this, because actually they end up saving money in the end, and it cleans up our water. And this has to be a true imperative. The other thing that I would do is make sure I've got all stakeholders at the table. I'm going to engage our farmers so that they feel that they have been a part of the discussion, but we must do something different, and we should be incenting them.
Okay, we're going to jump over to Mayor Coleman on this.
And then celebrating the farmers that have done best practices.
Mayor
Acknowledging
Coleman,
them
you're
publicly.
Well, first of all, the challenge is 90% of our crops are corn, soybeans, wheat, and sugar beets. Those are annual crops, and they're going to continue to be that. And one of the challenges we have is because of the shortened growing season, it's hard to get cover crops to take hold unless we plant them early enough. So developing strategies, working with the Ag Extension Service, incentivizing farmers to do that, there's now seeding by helicopter that is an important part of that. So there's a lot that we can do to incentivize it. I think somebody mentioned, making sure that there's a market for the cover crop at the end of the day. All of those things are important. But our farmers, everybody says, "Oh, these farmers are so rich." Well, they're not. They may have a lot of land. They may be rich, but they're cash poor. And so, we have to view this as a public good. just as we do septic systems, or just as we do, wastewater treatment systems, and help provide the support. When we have buffer strips and conservation programs, that's public support for farmers to do right by our water systems. And so we shouldn't just put this on the back of the farmers. We should figure out a way to help them and assist them in the planting of cover crops to avoid some of the erosion that we're seeing. It is a huge problem. But we also have to remember that a lot of the pollution that we're seeing in our waterways isn't just from farm runoff. It is from septic systems. It is from wastewater treatment systems that are insufficient.
Okay, we're jumping back over to Congressman Walz.
I grew up in a small community farming. My mother's still on the piece of land that's been in our family for over 100 years. I've served on the Agriculture Committee for 12 years and as a ranking member of the subcommittee on this very issue. I would suggest that I bring more agricultural experience to anybody who's run for governor in the last 50 years. And this issue, again, I don't have to talk about building relationships with the ag community. They support me. They support me because they know me. They know I know the issues, and they know that I'm there to work with them and understand that they want clean water too. 20 years ago, our largest export was topsoil. I attest that we are making progress of doing things, and there's real things that we can do if you can build the coalition. In the last Farm Bill, I made the suggestion that if you are going to farm your land in a way that is environmentally unsound, you should not receive any federal tax dollars to do that. But if you do comply to best practices in that, it's called conservation compliance, you will receive that. Within the first 2 years, we had 98% compliance. We're starting to see cover crops. We're incentivizing people to do the thing they know is right by making it there. And that comes with building the trust and having the support of that community. There's a reason there's only 10 rural Democrats left in America. And the reason that they split us off in this state because we don't have the trust of the people that need to be there. As your governor, I'll do it.
Okay, we're moving to Representative Liebling next.
Okay, well, I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that people who live in rural Minnesota or greater Minnesota are all one thing. People who live in the small towns in greater Minnesota, they need clean water. They want their water to be clean. And so I think we have to start from the premise that water belongs to all of us. Just because it falls on your farmland doesn't make it your water. We all have a responsibility to try to keep it clean with whatever methods we know to do that. So, I think people, for the most part, do want solutions. They need expertise from the state sometimes to help them. Incentives are fine, but we need to have a little bit of teeth sometimes too. So when I got a copy of the new nitrate proposed rule from the Department of Ag, I was just shocked at how toothless it is. It's all of our water, and at the end of the day, people cannot be allowed just to ignore the pollution that they are creating.
All right, and finally, Representative Teason on this question.
Well, I remember the night of the end of the 2013 session, and we were negotiating the final bill, which was the Environment Bill, and David Bly came in and said to me, we need to get this forever green in the bill. And we sat down and we forced the Senate at that point and the governor to accept that provision. And I raised that because that's the kind of leadership you actually need to get things done. It doesn't matter to talk about these things. You need someone over there who understands how to get these things done, and I think I can. So absolutely more investment in research and development, more investment in marketing, as Representative Murphy said. But there's other things going on in other states that we should learn from. Iowa is forgiving 5% of the cost of insurance premiums for folks that do this kind of work for cover crops. Maryland is making direct payments to farmers to make sure that they move, and they've gotten to 60% of their land covered in cover crops. Now, obviously, they have much less land than the state of Minnesota. But I also just want to pose one other question. Let's not believe that this is a silver bullet, because just doing cover crops and perennials is not going to keep our water clean in the way that we need to. We need to be aggressive on our regulatory side as well.
All right, we're going to go to our crowd. About 70 communities have elevated levels of nitrates in their drinking water at a cost of up to $7,500 per household to treat. So you got nitrates in your drinking water at home. These are a lot of private wells, and they've got to spend this extra money to make sure that it has safe levels of nitrates. So how will you help these communities address this problem? I'm sorry, I got to tell you who goes first. 45 seconds on this question, and we're starting with Auditor Otto.
Yeah, so, I mean, the most impaired waters in the state of Minnesota is in Congressional District 1, in southern Minnesota. We know what's creating pollution, and we must address it with a sense of urgency, and bottled water is not the answer. So it's always more expensive to clean water and provide drinking water than it is to actually get at the root of the problem. And I had a professor a long time ago at the U who said, a lot of the time in government we work to solve a problem, but we're looking at the tertiary problem. We're not looking at the primary problem. And the root of the problem is really changing practices. And if you know about cover crops, it reduces the use of all kinds of different things you're going to apply to the soil. So it does make a big difference. Farmers are open to it. We got to help them, and we will be incenting, as Paul was talking about, a bunch of incentives. We can do that.
Okay, next on this one is Mayor Coleman, 45 seconds.
Well, I think first of all, we have to actually do the testing so we do understand what the level of nitrates are. People are afraid to do that because they think that will be a pushback against farmers, and I don't think that we have to have a zero-sum game. We have to have a win-win solution so people have clean water, but farmers can continue to have successful crops. But this isn't a problem that's just eliminated, or just a nitrate problem. This is the problem that we're seeing out in Cottage Grove and in Woodbury and communities out in eastern metropolitan area. We need to hold polluters accountable. We need to make sure that they're responsible for cleaning up the water, providing some of those costs that we said to alleviate some of that. We have sulfides in drinking water up in northern Minnesota. We have to support communities as they change over or provide clean water for all of their customers and all of their residents.
All right, and Congressman Walz, you're next on this one.
Yeah, and when we're talking agriculturalists, keep in mind, these are the folks that produce the most abundant, the safest, and affordable food supply in the world. And they're folks that have lived on this land in many cases over 100 years. They're partners in it, working with us. Many of them have gone to the University of Minnesota and they studied this. There's things we can do of being seen as partners in this. And this issue is finding source point reduction, things that make sense for them, of seeing us all in this, making sure that with these communities that we are providing aid and understanding that your neighbors in these small communities have a much smaller tax base, whether it be for funding their schools or funding their water treatment plants. That's what we understand. We're kind of all in this together. But I think what happens is there's such a bunker mentality that Mayor Coleman's right. We have people who think it's better to not test for it because they're afraid of a regulatory regime rather than a fix. As your governor, I'll help find the solutions to help them fix this, from point source to what the solutions are, and it's helping together to make sure we have clean water.
Representative Liebling.
So I think it's been referred to here, the Brown County Board voted to not allow the state to give the residents of Brown County voluntary testing of their wells because they were afraid that that the farmers would be found to be polluting the water, and oh my gosh, then they'd have to clean it up. Well, I think it's pretty unreasonable to not find out something because you're afraid that you're going to have to clean it up. I mean, this is it reminds me way too much of Flint, Michigan and what happened there. Now, this is water. We can't afford to let people be drinking polluted water. And I referred before to the nitrate rule that I read, and I really was shocked at how weak it is. So it's good to work with people, but then if they don't work with you, then you got to have some teeth in your rules.
And Representative Teason.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is we can't let this cost rest on those individual families or individual communities. I mean, this is a problem we have to address as a state. So Mankato is actually coming to the Capitol this year from a community perspective to upgrade their wastewater treatment plant to deal with this nitrate issue, and we should help them with that. These individual families, we should find ways to let them drill new wells if they can and support them in that because this is a problem. But we should pay for it not with the general fund. We should pay for it with fees that we collect. We collect fertilizer fees. We collect pesticide fees. Those are the folks that are leading to this pollution, and so we need to focus on that. I also think it's really important that we actually test wells. We don't as a state. We've been resistant to that, and that we invest in wellhead protection to prevent this from happening in the future.
Okay, we're going to go back to the crowd again. Oh, did we skip you, Representative Murphy? Oh my gosh, how did I do that? Anyway. Apologize.
It's okay.
Representative Murphy, we'll go back 60 seconds, and the question again is about this.
So it is evident to me, and I'm sure to you as well, that water is something that people value highly in the state of Minnesota. And across the state of Minnesota, people are asking, how do we protect our water? Whether it's the impairment of water that's happening as a result of our current ag practices, or the natural resources work that's happening up in the northwestern part of the state and the northeastern part of the state, or the development that's happening in metropolitan areas. There are many things that are putting pressure on our water. For those communities that are experiencing impaired water, we need to help them. They need to be able to have access to good and clean water. And that's a health issue for me, and it's a justice issue for me, and we have to make sure that we're doing that. I was up in Moorhead and visited a farm up there. It was an organic farm, the Askegard farm, and they talked about the pressure they feel in their community because they've adopted some different practices in the way that they're farming. I grew up in a farming community, and we use conservation practices there, and I think we need to employ those more often. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to go back to the crowd. This question, how do you plan to reduce the methylated mercury in the St. Louis River, which renders the state fish inedible for women of childbearing age and children? And I've got to look here. This is going to be a split question. We're going to go with Congressman Walz, Representative Teason, and Mayor Coleman on this, starting with Congressman Walz, and this will be
just the
for-
guys. Yeah, that seems kind of sexist to me.
On the next one, it's just the girls. The next one is just the girls.
You're right.
So, starting with Congressman Walz here, 60 seconds.
Yeah, all of these issues are going to come up, whether it's arsenic, whether it's phosphorus, whether it's methylated mercury because of too much organic matter in the streams. This is where it comes back to what all of us are saying. This is putting the resources of the state, like the UMD is researching this now. What do they do about it? How do they address it? How do we make sure in education models, and this is one of the biggest tragedies of Flint, Michigan, where my colleague Dan Kildee is the information was known and it wasn't put out to people, ways that they could protect themselves to allow this to happen. So it's getting it out, getting the message out, doing the research that needs to be there, making sure that happens, and understanding once again of making sure that we don't see this as a local issue alone, as Paul said and grateful for this, of seeing Mankato as your neighbors that need to be invested in. And so I really think on these, and so many of these issues are going to come to this, again, this is not the people who are stopping the funding. They're the ones that turn down this invitation. We need to make it impossible for them to turn down funding by taking this message directly to the folks impacted by it.
Representative Teason.
Well, I think that we know kind of what causes the mercury to accelerate in these waters. You know, we know that it's the burning of coal, right? We know that it's chlorine bleaches and things like that. We know that it's trash incineration and those types of dealing with waste. So what we need to do is, we know that that's the cause. We need to go after those causes and follow the science to make sure that we make progress on those things. We do need to educate people so people don't get sick, and that's an important part of it. But we also need to understand that this is not just an issue that affects the state of Minnesota. And the pollution that we're seeing in the St. Louis River is not just coming from the state of Minnesota. So we need to build stronger partnerships with other states around the Great Lakes, in provinces around the Great Lakes, so we can actually take this on as a regional issue. And as governor, that's one of the approaches I really want to take to many of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight.
And Mayor Coleman.
Well, I do you a disservice to pretend like I have a 10-point plan for reduction of mercury in the St. Louis River, because I haven't gotten to that level of detail. But what I will say is I think this is a question of our values. Do we have the will? Do we have the determination to make sure that not only the St. Louis River, but every river across the state of Minnesota and every lake across the state of Minnesota is to the highest standard? I was chair of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative, which is mayors from everywhere from Bemidji down to New Orleans. It was conservative mayors, it was big town mayors, small town mayors, and we had a common interest. And even though there were a lot of folks that even couldn't mention climate change, couldn't really talk about environmental issues, we figured out a way to come together in a common interest to address serious issues for the Mississippi River, whether that was restoration of wetlands that helped reduce a lot of the pollution that we saw in the Mississippi River, whether it was actually addressing the issue of climate change, which was having a significant economic impact on the river. I think when we come together as people of goodwill with the determination to solve these problems, we can do that, and I certainly will as governor.
Okay, so we're going to go to another split question. And again, these split questions, we just have three of the candidates answer them, and it's random. So And these questions are coming in from Pigeonhole, so we don't even know what they're going to be ahead of time. So here we go. Minnesota's water infrastructure is getting old and causing problems with lead in pipes, leaks, pollution, and breaks. What do you propose to do to address this problem? And this is going to go to Representative Liebling, then Representative Murphy, and then Auditor Otto. Representative Liebling.
Right. Well, often when we talk about nickel sulfide mining or oil pipelines, people say we need the jobs. Well, there's plenty of work to do in the state. There's lots of jobs to be done fixing our infrastructure for water all over the state. And this is something that the state should be doing through our bonding bill. And, you know, we can afford to at least make some good headway on that. So I think it's pretty obvious that we need to be putting more resources into having our water infrastructure updated. You know, it only lasts so many years, and this is just something that we have to do. And just in my last few seconds, I want to say that one of the things I like to talk about is that oftentimes we don't tell Minnesotans what their money buys. I think when people know what their tax dollars are buying, they're a lot more willing to pay those taxes. And this is an area I think a lot of people would be happy to see their tax dollars going.
Representative Murphy.
I was in Tower, Minnesota, and the water clerk there talked about the cost, both in terms of tax dollars and fees, but also in cost of human relations when that community continues to invest in repairing their water infrastructure. She said when she raises the fees in the community, it takes about 8 months before people start talking to her again. There is between $11 and $13 billion worth of work to do on our wastewater and drinking water infrastructure across the state of Minnesota. And when I'm the governor for the state of Minnesota, I'm going to make that a priority every year in a bonding bill. This is good jobs for people, but it is critical to our communities across the state. And if we want Minnesota to be a place where people can choose to live wherever they want to live, water infrastructure should be equalized across the state of Minnesota. We will do this work together, but it is critical work for the state of Minnesota, and it's good jobs for people. It's a win-win.
And Auditor Otto.
So excited about this question. So our cities hold most of our civil infrastructure, and we have over 600 cities that are under 2,500 in population. I ran for a third term as state auditor because I was worried about the long-term liability we have sitting out there. And when you think about how small some of these communities are, they don't have the population base to spread the costs across. And we have the Public Facilities Authority, Department of Health, PCA. I've been working with all of them along with some engineers on this issue, and we've created a GIS map to begin to show Minnesotans with a really simple picture, not a 200 or 300 page government report, but taking a bunch of siloed data and showing people what do we have, where is it located, how old is it, how much, if they need financing, like how expensive are their projects. All this stuff is on the Office of the State Auditor website. It's for drinking water assets and wastewater treatment production assets, and you can do all kinds of filters and sorts, but all the grant makers and low interest loan people are using these maps. We're all working together. As governor, we're going to do long-term financial planning and asset management planning.
All right, and we're going to find out what's next. We're going to move on to legacy and funding.
I'll handle this. So the first question, this will be a 60-second question. How would you determine when, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, apologize. How would you determine when improper substitution occurs with constitutionally dedicated funds? What tools and authorities would you use to protect these voter-approved funds? This is a question that the candidates have been given in advance. Each will have 60 seconds to answer, and we will start with Representative Teason.
Well, I voted for the legacy amendment and supported it because I saw the general fund share of money going to the environment decreasing. But I don't know that it's provided the kind of solution that we wanted, and some of it comes right back to this. And this does raise a couple of issues for me. First of all, the way we fund our environmental agencies in the state of Minnesota is absurd. You cannot follow the money because a little bit of it comes from the general fund, but there's so many other streams of money flowing in there. No one knows. Most people don't know where it's coming from. So understanding that piece of it is critically important, and sorting that out so there is some transparency and public accountability is critical. The other thing that the governor can do is understand that one of the reasons that we supplant is because the agencies that the governor is in charge of wants to supplant because they see it as a new source of money to support their operations. We need a governor that's going to reach into the agencies and say that's not okay, and we're not going to do that anymore. Find and fight for it. Don't take the easy way out. Fight for the money in the legislature that you really need to run your agency. Finally, we need to get to defined outcomes so we know what we're going to be getting as a result of spending this money, and if we do that, I think we get to a better place in terms of supplanting.
Thank you. Next, Representative Murphy.
So I will, of course, stand with you and with the voters who put the legacy amendment in place. And it is important, especially when we're in tight budget times, not to take the money and substitute the legacy funding for things that we should already be doing with bonding and with state general funds. So I will protect that money. But I want to talk about our ambition. I think it's important that we not just think about how do we protect that money. We have to do that. We have to use it for its intended purposes. But where do we want to go with that money? I've been on the Legacy Committee before. A lot of the discussion happens in dispersed ways and it comes through the legislature quickly. I want to work with you to make sure I understand where we're going in the next 10 and 20 years and use those funds that were supported by Minnesotans to invest in the things that build the state's future, our economic future, but our environmentally strong and sound future. I want to do that work with you.
Thank you. Next for this question is Congressman Walz.
Well, first of all, this question, like so many others, but this is exactly why we must win this governor's race. Because the person in charge, and that's what they've done, is to undermine these very things that we've done. Paul is right. The transparency in the budget, using the executive authority to make sure there's transparency in that and the agencies are showing where the money is going. I would work closely with Attorney General Swanson to make sure if they're trying to come around the spirit of the amendment and the legal aspects of it, working with them to get there. But once again, this is so popular, and I want to applaud all of these members who were up here who passed this and made this happen, and all of you as an organization. Remember that day when the Legacy Amendment passed and all these things? It's because it's what the public wanted. We have the social permit to put this money exactly where it goes. They've been slowly undermining it. The job of the governor is, and what I believe I'm able to do is, go to every one of those rural districts and call out their members in a way that that's not what they voted for. So bring the transparency, work with the Attorney General, but making sure this is what the vast majority of people on a ballot initiative asked for, and they are undermining that. That needs to be called out every single day.
Thank you. Next, Representative Liebling.
So, the actual question is, how would you determine when improper substitution occurs? It's usually pretty clear, I think, when that's happening. And perhaps more important is why it happens, and that is, I think some of my colleagues have referred to it, that the Republicans are often, they're about smaller government, smaller, smaller, smaller. And we saw under the Pawlenty administration, it really was a lot of shifts, tricks, and gimmicks to pretend that we didn't need money in our government. And one of the places they do these shifts, tricks, and gimmicks is with the legacy money. So I think as governor, what I would do is be willing to veto a bill that substitutes instead of uses the money the way it's supposed to be used. And governors get a lot of what they want. So if you're very clear at the outset about what you will and will not accept, you're usually going to get what you're asking for.
Thank you. Next on this question, Mayor Coleman.
Well, I think there's actually a pretty easy litmus test to determine whether there was an improper shifting of funding. If the Republicans proposed it, you can pretty much be assured that it was an improper shift of money. The fact of the matter, as I said earlier, before the legacy amendment, we had $20 million worth of bonding. The legacy amendment was supposed to supplement that, not substitute for it. And we need to continue to fight for it and need to continue to invest these resources. But think about this. The moderator said this at the beginning. All candidates for governor were invited to participate tonight. Only Democratic candidates showed up. We're talking about the environment. We're talking about the quality of our water, the quality of our air, the quality of our natural resources, our hunting lands, our farmers. Why in God's green earth would a Republican not show up to have this important conversation? And what are they afraid of? The fact of the matter is they don't care about the environment. They don't stand up and protect it. They don't understand the importance of the history of our environment in the state of Minnesota. And so every one of us on the stage has, I think, a great record to run on. The Republicans need to be held accountable.
Thank you. And Auditor Otto.
So being the state auditor, I am familiar with the Constitution. I was just in front of the Supreme Court and working to enforce it. The Constitution is the people's contract, and it's limited power they give those that they elect to run their government. And if there's a violation of the Constitution, it's not that hard to figure out. I have a brilliant general counsel right now, Ramona Advani. She will be my general counsel if I become your governor, and we will make sure we do analysis on whether they're supplanting traditional funding. And you veto, that's one tool, and if you need to go to the courts, that's your next tool. But the Constitution is something that must be respected in the state of Minnesota. I've never been afraid to stand up for it. You know, there's a higher bar, and so passing a constitutional amendment is a higher bar, and the legislature does not get to run over the Constitution, which I've seen them doing over and over and over with single subject violations, which have ended up these garbage bills. Very bad environmental policy has been passed with this practice, and I'm actually working to try to stop it with my lawsuit.
Thank you. I want to stick for a second with the constitutionally dedicated funds. Mayor Coleman is correct that 6 Republican candidates were invited to this forum, and as I understand it, none elected to attend. But Democratic candidates, I'm not sure you can put everything in on the Republicans. If you recall, Mayor Dayton vetoed a portion of the legacy bill because of some aspects that Representative Phyllis Kahn inserted into it a number of years ago that she supported. And the question to you all, and if you're all still in the field come game fair, you will be asked this question as well, is a yes or no question, which is, will you abide by the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council recommendations? And if they are not observed in a bill that comes to you from the legislature, will you veto that portion of the bill? And we're going to go in the same order. This is a yes or no question. Let's go down the line. Start with Representative Teason.
No, I think is the answer.
Okay, Representative Murphy.
Yeah, what, can you ask it one more time? I'm sorry.
Let's clarify the question again.
I apologize.
It's all right.
If
I won't necessarily follow the recommendations of Lessard-Sams if I don't agree with it.
that's a fair answer. Does everyone, Representative Murphy, do you understand the question?
I do, and my answer is the same as Representative Teason's.
Congressman Walz.
I agree. I would not follow it if I disagreed with it. I think it's important to notice putting people on the board that care about the spirit and the letter of what it's there for is really important job of the government.
Okay, I'm going to clarify the question again. I see a couple of people asking. I think you guys understood it, but I see a couple of people. My question is, if the legislature changes the recommendations of the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council, and that arrives at your desk as governor, would you veto that bill, or would you stick to the recommendations of the Lessard-Sams Council? You don't always have the ability as governor to affirmatively insert something, so you end up having to veto the thing that's not the recommendation of the council. I know that's a little
This is complicated, Dave.
but I think a lot of people watching this know this issue very
This has been an issue, yeah.
It has. Representative Liebling.
So if I'm understanding this right, the question is, if the legislature changes it, would I veto it just because it's not the recommendation of the Lessard-Sams Council?
Correct.
And the answer is no.
Thank
If
you.
I otherwise agree.
Mayor Coleman.
This is why I could never complete building projects that my kids got for Christmas. So insert slot. Yes, I wouldn't just have to take a blanket recommendation from either the legislature or the
yes or
commission.
no?
So, well, nobody else has answered yes or no. The answer is I would reserve the right to make an independent determination.
Okay, that's maybe. And Auditor Otto.
You know, I believe I would be supporting Lessard-Samuel's recommendations.
Thank you. Apologize if that question was a bit
Confusing.
Let's go to the
We
crowd
like to
now.
challenge them, right?
Well,
I feel like we should be able to get you
Should we
back.
have her answer it?
Let's
Phyllis is here. Should we have her answer it too?
She will be in the reception afterwards.
Okay.
Yes, we can have a long-winded debate out there.
Okay. 45-second question from the crowd now for all of the candidates. This is one we haven't seen. Since 2001, the state commitment of general fund dollars for environment and conservation has dropped from a consistent 2% of the budget to less than 1%. Would you work to reverse this trend? And if so, how? For this question, we'll start with Representative Murphy. You have 45 seconds.
I don't need 45 seconds to answer this question. I think Minnesotans agree. And much of what we're talking about tonight, Minnesotans support. It is important that we're investing in our environment and our land and in Minnesota's heritage. So yes, I would reverse the trend as you're describing, and that would be, you'd seen that in the budget that I proposed when I'm first elected.
Next, Congressman Walz.
Yes, of course. And again, I would, all of you, this singing, the choir singing on this, we know what needs to be done. We know this makes sense. And the issue is can we take this message and convince our friends and neighbors of this? This is the real key that's happening here. Because come November, this is going to be the debate. The debate is the Republicans going after them and saying that Democrats are increasing your taxes and doing all this. We need to be strategic and smart on how we build the coalition to make this absolutely politically untenable for them if they don't do this. The public has asked for this. They know the return on the dollar is good. We need to know where their tax dollars are going and tell people that, but get to them and make them have ownership in this. These are not people that are dug in where they're at, but if we think they're just going to go to it because we tell them we have a better plan, we always have better plans and still lose elections. We got to be smarter on how we do that, and that's how you increase it.
Thank you. Next up, Representative Liebling.
So I think the question is, I'm going to reframe it a little bit. I don't think it's important what percentage of the budget we spend on something, because that's relative to the size of the budget and what other things are costing. But if the question is, would I insist on having adequate funding for environmental issues and that we not be decreasing that when our needs are increasing? Absolutely. So I would say absolutely I would press for adequate funding so that we can preserve and improve our environment. I think it's important, in my estimation, as I've gone around the state, this is incredibly important to everyone wherever they live in this state. Everyone cares about their water, everyone cares about their air, and most people, at least Democrats, care about climate change.
Thank you, Mayor Coleman.
It's hard to improve upon Tina's answer because it is exactly right. It's not a percentage question. It's are the resources adequate? This is the same issue we face with local government aid, which is about the same percentage of overall funding. Is it adequate to support cities across the state of Minnesota in providing the needs of their constituents? But the fact of the matter is we need to make sure that we're doing that. We need to make sure that we have adequate resources. But there's a whole list of things that we as candidates are supporting. And the issue is, in an issue of an unbalanced budget, how are we going to get there? In 2010, Governor Dayton ran on a very clear message. I'm going to make sure that millionaires and billionaires and large corporations in the state of Minnesota pay their fair share. They just got a huge tax break by the Congress and by the President. I want to make sure that millionaires and billionaires pay their fair share so that we can address adequately the needs of the state of Minnesota.
Thank
Can
you.
I clarify on that? That's the Republican Congress. Be specific.
Yeah, that might be right. Yeah, I think that is accurate. Yeah.
Moving right along, gentlemen. Auditor Otto, this question is to you next.
So as governor, you set the budget and you present a budget. And so our budgets always reflect our priorities, and I will work to increase and get back up to the level that we were at before, because again, it's a value and a priority of ours as Minnesotans. And to be perfectly honest too, it's not that hard. Your job is to win the hearts and minds and make sure you're reflecting the agenda of Minnesotans. And when people try to degrade the plans that I put out that are game-changing, they're extraordinarily strong economic plans, that's just the definitive plans I'm selling to Minnesotans right now that reflect their hopes and dreams. And I did this huge listening session, and that's how you win as governor. I have a governor who mentored me for a long time. And this is exactly what you do to win. And it's a grassroots campaign, and we can win, and we can make extraordinary things happen.
Time.
Thank you, Representative Teason.
Absolutely, I would reverse that trend and get back to the funding levels that we had before. You have to do it in a couple ways. One of the things I think you really have to be we have to be much better about is defining the outcomes that we want to get from our investment of environmental dollars. People don't understand what they're getting in response to that. We need to have more transparency. We also need to fight for and stand up for the public employees who are doing amazing work and get denigrated as a result of that. That's one of the reasons this funding has gone down. But we also need a stable budget. And one of the things I'm most proud of when I was Speaker of the House, and it's not easy, it's hard work, but to get that tax raise that Mayor Coleman talked about passed was a big job. And making sure we made the right investments using that money was also a big job. I'm the only one who has gone through in the detail on this stage who has actually gone through that process and been there in the trenches fighting for that. And that is how we're going to get this work done.
Thank you. We are now moving on to the next session. These are cross-cutting issues.
And we're going to shorten these. These are going to be 45-second answers. You want to take the first one?
Yes, sorry. The first question. Minnesota environmental problems, many believe, fall disproportionately on people of color, tribal communities, and people with low incomes. As governor, what steps would you take to address these disparities? This was a question the candidates received in advance. You have 45 seconds to answer it. We're starting with Representative Teason.
Well, there's a lot that we can do on this subject. I'm going to just focus in on two things quickly. The first thing is I have some legislation called equity notes that would basically say not only do you look at the cost of a bill, but you look at whether that bill is going to increase or decrease these opportunity gaps, these racial disparities that we see in many ways, and absolutely in the environmental area you see that. In fact, I passed it off the House floor in the legacy bill to have this reporting done. It was stripped out in conference committee, unfortunately, but that is one of the approaches we can take. Let's be intentional about the policies we adopt to make sure that they're going to be closing those unfortunate gaps. The second thing we have to do is we have to respect the sovereignty of the tribes. And that's a fundamental principle for me, and it's something that I will always stand up for.
Thank you. This question next goes to Mayor Coleman.
Well, unfortunately, environmental injustice has been as much a part of this country since the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock as any other aspect of it. And the fact is we have to work hard to reverse what we have done and the damage that we have done to communities of color, to tribal communities, and to low-income folks. If you look at the issue of climate change, who is going to be most impacted by it? People in the inner city, low-income communities, people of color that don't have air conditioning when there's a 120-degree heat index. Getting kids outdoors, getting them to participate. It's one of the things I did. We had a program where we send kids out to Glacier National Park just so they can experience the outdoors because they have to buy in and they have to get the benefits of having a great environment in the state of Minnesota. One of the reasons why we're getting, moving towards organized collection, it's an environmental justice issue. If you have trash collection in Highland, it's one thing, but if you're in Frogtown, our alleys are filling with garbage because we don't have organized trash collection. There's a lot of folks that are getting beat up on that issue, but it's an environmental justice issue.
Thank you. Auditor Otto, you're next with this question. 45 seconds.
My Minnesota Power Plan will greatly reduce carbon emissions, and a lot of our lower income communities live close to big highways and big roads, and so higher levels of asthma, COPD. So that's going to greatly improve many people's lives. Pipelines, copper mining, copper mining impacts wild rice. And wild rice is an extraordinarily important crop to protect and for our Native communities. So anyway, making sure that we're doing our very best to make sure that they can harvest that rice, which is sacred to them. And that's it.
Thank you. Representative Murphy.
The social determinants of health, I think, are important to consider when we think about this question. Where we live, the housing that we live in, the neighborhood we live in, our economic stability, our actual health and education. Those things and lack of access to them are often concentrated in communities of color and low-income neighborhoods and for tribal communities. And when I am the governor, I'm going to be making decisions with the distinct lenses of health and equity. One thing that I think is going to be very important when I think about my administration and when I think about Lessard-Sams and when I think about LCCMR is the people appointed to those groups are going to look like Minnesota and our future. We will have a representative cabinet. We will have representative councils so that the lived experiences of Minnesotans are represented in the government.
Thank you. Next, Congressman Walz.
All of us have had the better part of a year to build campaigns to show that we're viable to be able to win in Minnesota. We've also had the opportunity in this that it's a job interview to show how we're going to act. How are we treating our employees? Are we paying a living wage? Are we providing health care? And in my campaign, I did something very different. I had a running mate form the ticket early, which is Peggy Flanagan, a proud daughter of the White Earth Nation of Ojibwe, to show what we're really going to do, how we're going to talk about this. But I think the real question for all of us in this room is, we all know that environmental degradation falls most impactful on those economically challenged and people of color. I asked you to look around the room. How diverse is the room here tonight? How diverse are the boards of our organizations? How are we engaging those people to be leaders in this, not just the kids engaging, but all of us? And I think as your governor, modeling it and getting out there and building that is one of the ways we show how we address this.
Thank you. And finally, Representative Liebling.
So racial disparities in our state are really, really bad. And this is something that as Minnesotans, all of us should be hanging our heads in shame. But more importantly, if we allow this to go on, it's going to impact all of us. This is really about how we're going to go forward as a state. We have been very fortunate. Our Commissioner of Health set us on a path toward something called Health in All Policies, which I think is great. He's done a lot of work, and we should continue that work on health equity. But most important, I think we need to bring people from these diverse communities in to help decide what they need. That's really critical, not to be telling them what we can do for them and to them, but having them come in and helping to make policies that actually will work for them in their communities.
All right, we're going to move on to the another cross-cutting question. This may be our last question. We'll see what our timekeepers say. Neonicotinoid-coated seeds are killing bees and aquatic organisms, yet remain unregulated in Minnesota. Would you support a treated seed program to provide the state with authority to regulate these seeds? 45 seconds. This one goes first to Mayor Coleman.
This should be an answer, a yes or no question. Yes is the answer. I think that we need to do a lot of things to restore our native habitat. We have taken very specific steps in the city of St. Paul to create spaces for pollinators. One of the things I was very proud of, my mother-in-law, may she rest in peace, was a firm believer that you had to create your yards to be receptive to pollinators and to butterflies. And so every summer I have the benefit of sitting out in my front yard looking at the pollinators, looking at the butterflies, because we can take individualized action. This doesn't have to be just a state action to help restore our pollinator community, but we do have to regulate it. We do have to, when we know an exact cause for a problem like neonicotinoids, if I've said that correctly, then we need to address that. And to say otherwise is to doom us all to a really unpleasant future.
Auditor Otto?
We should absolutely have a conversation about having a treated seed program where we can regulate. You know, we all like food, and our pollinators are necessary in order to grow food, and we've been learning a lot about pollinators and neonics, and we have issues around habitat, not enough habitat for some of our pollinators, and there's a lot of really great work going on around our state with increasing habitat and educating people around neonics, and also greenhouses changing their practices as well so we can get plants that are neonic free. But this is we don't always get the importance of these little critters, but they are important, and so I think it's worth a conversation and making sure we follow evidence-based practices.
Representative Murphy?
So yes, of course, I am open to a treated seed program, and I want to work with you to put that into place for the many reasons that you know. And as always, I want to make sure that science is our guide, and the science on this is clear, and we should take action for food security and for pollinators. There should be bees everywhere, and we can make that happen.
Congressman Walz?
To apply pesticides, you have to be licensed, and it's a rigorous process to do it. On these coated seeds, you do not, but I would ask all of you in here, again, look at the way the question is worded and think of that farmer in southern Brown County that the first thing they hear is that we're going to regulate. This is an issue of giving them the tools necessary to understand the risks by these, to give them the ability to be able to find solutions that go around that. If it does come about being licensing, bring them into the process of helping write the licensing that will reduce the runoff of this, because what they do and why they're digging in and why this bunker mentality is, the first word they hear is regulate on this. When they are highly regulated on under pesticides, this is an issue of education, getting it out to folks, finding the partners in it. They're the ones that are going to be handling the seeds. They're the ones that are going to be putting them down. They don't want to spend one more penny than they have to. This is where we get partners to get to the goal of making sure we don't have our pollinator destruction.
Representative Liebling.
Well, this is one of those issues that I was talking about in the beginning. This is about big corporate giants who are making big bucks on these seeds. I think it's Monsanto that's behind all of this. You know, for the farmer will be fine if Monsanto changes its practices. And I think that we have to stand up for this. We all need the bees. We cannot afford to have them die. We know what the science is. And, you know, just because somebody has lots of lobbyists at the Capitol, this is where we have to have a backbone and stand up for people's health and stand up for our entire industry. I mean, a lot of people want to grow stuff, and they're not going to be able to do it without the bees.
And finally, Representative Teason.
Well, I do support a treated seed program. I think it's dangerous, though, when we talk about this as kind of a bad guys versus good guys issue, because quite frankly, treated seeds are actually better in many cases than just spraying pesticides. But it's also worse when we have them in concentrated amounts, and it's getting to that nuance, I think, that is going to be the key. It's not a, you know, I'm right and you're wrong kind of issue, and too many times in the conversations we have around these issues, we take the approach of I'm right and you're wrong, and that doesn't get us, that doesn't advance the ball for us. So I think it's really important what Congressman Walz said, is that as we have this discussion, we have to bring the farmers and others who are part of this discussion into the discussion early on to understand how to set this up in a way that's going to work for them, but get the outcome we want. And I am confident we can do that if we actually understand that there's nuance here.
Hey!
Hi-yo.
They're both good.
We thank the candidates, but we are not quite done yet, correct? We're doing closings?
We're doing closing statements.
Yes.
I would just like to say thank you, everyone who's in the theater, for being here, and thank you for tuning in if you're live streaming this at home. We noted it before, but these 6 candidates were not the only ones invited. We did, the organizers of this event did invite other candidates from other parties. I would just say that if you are out there listening to this and you didn't hear an answer that you were hoping to hear, keep asking questions of all these candidates. And I'm committed in the next, what is it? How many days left before Election Day? Anybody?
Nobody's counting.
Nobody's counting. Okay, well, I'm committed. I'm committed to keep asking these questions of all candidates as we move through the campaign season, and encourage all of you to be engaged in asking questions and discussing these topics.
Yeah, and we've covered a lot of ground tonight, but we do have the final closing statements from each candidate. Each candidate will have no more than 60 seconds to provide their closing statement. We're going to go in reverse alphabetical order. We're going to start with Congressman Walz.
The teacher in me, I welcome that. But thank you all. Thank you to our moderators. Did a great job. To all of you, as the teacher in me too, is thank you for your attention. But more importantly, thank you for believing in our democracy. This is what's called upon us. I never prepared my life to run for office. I have teaching and coaching. I served in the military. I now have the distinction and the honor of being the highest ranking enlisted service member in the history of this country to serve in the United States Congress. And I've approached the issues that the decency and the goodness of this country is dependent on us being engaged in this. I've taken a progressive message in a district that the second Democrat in 125 years to win, but not just winning elections, building coalitions to solve problems, to move forward on things like suicide, veteran suicide, and opioid reduction, moving forward on this idea that every child, it's what motivated me to run for office, every child in my class needed to have an opportunity, and not every child came with those same opportunities when they got there. We as a state can figure out how to do that. When we do that, we are better, we're more prosperous, and we're fairer. And the inclusion of everyone into that matters. As your governor, I will take this message into every Legion Hall from Sleepy-Eyed International Falls. I will stand up and build these coalitions to get things done. I will stand on our progressive values, and we can and must win. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Congressman Walz. Representative Teason next. Talk and walk. You're being timed as soon as you go.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming out and for listening today. Thank you for the questions, and thanks to everybody up here. You know, this is a really, really serious topic, and it does require a lot of nuance and discussion as we think about how we're going to get to the right solutions. One of the things I think I can bring to this race, and I made a mistake earlier. I said that I was the only one in the trenches fighting to get a stable budget. There were a lot of people on this stage that helped me do that. But we have to understand that someone having that experience of being in those negotiations, standing tough when you have to against attempts to strip away environmental regulations, which I've done, And also leading the way on things like this, the solar standard, to get really good progress going is really important. The other thing that I think that I can offer to you, I don't come to my politics with certainty. I come to my politics with curiosity. And I think too often in our politics these days, and you see it in the White House absolutely, there's a certainty that gets in the way of actually progress. I hope that when we think about who the next governor should be, we value things like curiosity and humility and willingness to listen to other people. That I think I can offer you, and I look forward to having further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. Auditor Rebecca Otto.
Hello. So your phone just came off. Are we okay? All right. I'm Rebecca Otto, and I'm so thankful to have been here this evening with you. Thank you for your patience, listening, for your great questions. You know, I've got what I call my Renew Minnesota agenda. It's a comprehensive statewide vision informed by Minnesotans, and it's all about making sure that we have a strong economy, that we have equality of opportunity, economic, educational, that we have environmental justice. And you know, the world is changing, but it's changing in a great way, and there's extraordinary opportunity in that change. And I've run and won statewide 3 times. When Pawlenty ran and I won for state auditor, I won by the largest margin in 112 years against an incumbent. We lost the governor's seat. However, I won more rural counties than Pawlenty when I ran. When Dayton's run, I've won more rural counties than he has. So when we think about who we want as our governor, I would love to be your governor. I've worked on finances. I've worked with fire chiefs, volunteer firefighters, township supervisors, and I think I've got a great agenda that's informed by Minnesotans, and I would really appreciate your support. RebeccaOtto.com. Hope you will vote for me in the straw poll on February 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Auditor Otto. Next, we have Representative Erin Murphy.
I will confess to you that I love politics, and I have a lot of faith in us. I want to build our bright future. I want to do that with you. It's important that we're talking about this issue tonight. It is one of the most important issues to the people of Minnesota. When I ran for office the first time, a woman told me, remember this, she said, I didn't grow up in St. Paul. I grew up in a small town, so remember the whole state of Minnesota when you get yourself elected. And I, for the last 11 years, have spent my time with the people of Minnesota all over, in our farm fields, in our schools, in our hospitals and clinics, and Minnesotans have been my very best teachers. And as a result of that time, I am devoted to us and to our future. There are people who suggest that because we might lose this election that we should not confront the tough issues in front of us. But I believe to win this election, we have to stand up for what we believe in. We have to stand up for the things that build our bright future. We are on a fight on the front line here in the state of Minnesota for a progressive future for the people of Minnesota. And we're on the front line of a fight for the soul of this nation. And if you believe, like I do, that we can build this future together, I hope you'll join me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Murphy. Next, we have Representative Tina Liebling.
All right, well, thank you all. I too appreciate your being here and your attention. So, you know, it would be great if we lived in a world right now where we didn't have to hear the political bickering that we hear. I think a lot of us don't like that. And we'd love to have a politics where we could say, let's all just find creative solutions and we can agree on stuff and then we can move forward. Unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. We live in a world where special interests, the 1%, whatever you want to call them, power and money are being more and more concentrated. And a lot of that is around fossil fuels. How can we deny that? So some of it is around chemicals. I mean, these giant corporations are having their way with us. And so we have to fight for the things that we want. You can always compromise after you fight. I like to tell people I've been married 32 years, so you know I know how to compromise. But if you're looking for a bold progressive for your next governor, just remember what TINA stands for. There is no alternative. So I would appreciate your vote on February 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Liebling. And for the final closing statement, we have Mayor Chris Coleman.
October of 2005, I stood on this very stage debating the former mayor of the city of St. Paul. And at that time, I pledged that if I was elected mayor, I would make St. Paul a leader on the fight against climate change. And that's exactly what we did. I said that we would make St. Paul a leader on sustainability and environmental protection, and that's exactly what we did. My very first act of mayor was to sign the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement with mayors across the United States of America. And we went out and we actually did the hard work. We have great candidates here, folks, but there's one candidate that has 12 years of a record of leading an administration, of bringing a community together and focusing in on the important environmental issues of our time. As environmentalists, as Democrats, we can't afford to get into a circular firing squad because we're not peer on every single issue. We're going to have disagreements. We're going to have fundamental things that we say, I don't agree with you on. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that a Democrat wins this office, that makes sure that we have environmental protections on the issues of this, that we're facing in the state, and we have someone that leads on that issue. I have done it for 12 years. I will do it as your next governor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Coleman. And I waited till the end to lose my voice. Thank you, candidates, and let's go back to Stephanie.
Thank you. I'd just like to start by asking you all to join me in thanking our candidates and moderators who joined us tonight.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank our wonderful hosts here at Hamline University and thank our audience members here and across the state watching at home or at satellite parties for tuning in and providing questions tonight on Pigeonhole. So here's to you. Just a few last things before we close out for this evening. The audience poll is now live on Pigeonhole until 9:30 p.m. So we ask that you please go on to Pigeonhole again and answer the following question. Which of tonight's participating candidates do you think best represented your environment and conservation priorities? For those who are here tonight and want to watch a rerun, or for folks who missed this forum tonight, we'll have a recording of tonight's event available online in the coming days, so please keep your eye on announcements from event partners on that soon. And finally, for attendees who are at Hamline University, we have some light refreshments, including a cash bar available in the atrium, so we hope you stick around to join us. And to close out, we're grateful for the wonderful audience participation at tonight's forum. We hope you'll all consider participating in your party caucuses on February 6th. If you'd like to look for more information about that, you can go to the Secretary of State's website for the information on the caucus of your choice. With that, I think we'd like to thank the candidates and all of you again. Have a great night.
We're adding more space on Pigeonhole, so if they need to wait a minute to vote, we're getting it, so if they might have to wait.
Wow, it's live.
I've just been informed if Pigeonhole doesn't work right away, just give it a second. But you're good. Thanks for being here.